There's a pot, somewhere in the hills outside Kyoto, that has not been fully empty in over a century. The family who owns it does not scrub it. They do not wash it with soap. They do not even rinse it unless the contents have scorched, which happens almost never. The pot is earthenware, dark as the inside of a cave, and its surface carries a patina so thick and black it looks like obsidian that has melted and pooled. If you touch the inside, your fingers would come away slick with the ghost of 1,000 meals. And here is where the story begins, because that pot is not dirty. It is an archive. Seasoning in the culinary world is a word we use for salt, for spice, for the finishing touch. But in the homes where pots are passed down like Bibles, seasoning means something else entirely. It means the deliberate layering of fat, of lipid, of memory, cured into the porous clay over years of use. Modern chemistry calls this polymerization of oils. The same process that makes a cast iron skillet non-stick after enough bacon. But this chamber pot of a vessel, this dark nabe, has taken that process and stretched it across decades until the seasoning is no longer a coating. It is the pot itself. There is a grandmother in Nagasaki whose family has kept a single nabe pot since the early 1800s. Every winter, the pot is filled with a base broth of kombu and dried bonito, then layered with root vegetables, then with tofu, then with a cut of wild boar when the family could afford it. The broth is never discarded. It is topped off. It is simmered. It thickens and thins across the months, absorbing the essence of every ingredient that ever touched it. By February, the broth tastes like the entire year. By March, it tastes like the decade. Let us pause here and acknowledge what most people would feel. If you have ever scraped a pan and wondered what flavor you were washing away, you know the quiet guilt of erasing a meal's ghost. You have stood at the sink with a sponge and felt that perhaps the crust was not waste, but witness. The grandmother in Nagasaki does not feel guilt. She feels continuity. Her pot does not change with every recipe. The recipe changes, and the pot remembers all of them. If you have ever caught yourself hesitating before scrubbing a pan clean, stay with this channel. We will keep gathering these hidden histories together. And tell me in the comments, what is one dish you wish a family pot could remember from your own past? This is where the science meets the soul. Lipid residue analysis, the kind of forensic chemistry used to study ancient Jomon pottery from 10,000 years ago, has shown that the fatty acids in a pot's walls survive for millennia. When researchers at the University of Tokyo analyzed seasoning layers from a 17th century Japanese earthenware pot, they found traces of millet, of salmon, of a kind of wild garlic that no longer grows in that region. The pot was not simply a container. It was a menu of an extinct ecology, and the family who owned it had no idea. They just knew the broth tasted better than anything they could make in a new pot. Now consider the Korean jangdok, the large earthenware jars used for fermenting soy sauce and fermented soybean paste. These jars are never washed. They are rinsed with water sometimes, but never scrubbed. The mold and bacteria that live in the porous clay form a symbiotic ecosystem that flavors the paste year after year. A jar that has fermented for 50 years produces a taste that a new jar cannot replicate. The Korean government has designated certain jangdok as cultural properties, not because of the jars themselves, but because of the living microbial culture inside them. The ecosystem is the artifact. And yet, in the modern kitchen, we are taught that clean means sterile, that a pot should be returned to its original state after every use, that any residue is left over and should be erased. This belief is so deeply embedded that most people feel a physical discomfort at the thought of a pot that has never been washed. But here is the beautiful part. That discomfort is cultural, not biological. Our ancestors never washed their cooking vessels. They scraped them. They oiled them. They simmered water in them to loosen stubborn bits. But they never applied the soapy sponge because they understood, implicitly, that the pot was alive. The grandfather of the Nagasaki family tells a story. In the winter of 1941, during the food shortages of World War II, the family had nothing to put in the pot. No vegetables, no meat, no tofu. They boiled water. And that water, because it passed through the seasoning of decades, came out tasting of broth. They survived that winter on the memory of food preserved in the clay. The pot fed them what it had saved. This is the detail most people miss. A pot that is never washed is not a pot that is never cleaned. It is a pot that is maintained. The seasoning must be fed. If you let it dry out, it cracks. If you use too much acidity, it leaches. If you scrub it with detergent, you kill the lipid layer and have to start over. The relationship is one of mutual care. The pot holds flavor. The holder keeps the pot alive. In Kyoto, there is a professional nabemono chef named Tanaka who has not washed his favorite earthen nabe in 22 years. He scrapes it. He wipes it with a damp cloth. He fills it with sake and lets it simmer for an hour after a heavy fish course. But he never uses soap. The pot, he says, has learned the rhythm of his cooking. It knows how long to hold heat. It knows when to release the fat. It is not a tool. It is a partner. And here's the pivot, because what Tanaka describes is not superstition. It is material science. The polymerization of oils creates a surface that is hydrophobic. It repels water, which means the pot does not absorb the broth of the next meal. It absorbs only the volatile aromatic compounds, the flavor molecules that float up in the steam. The pot does not mix flavors. It layers them, and each layer, each meal, adds a note to the chord that the next meal will play. There's a study from the journal Food Chemistry in 2016 that analyzed the volatile compounds in a 30-year-old Korean ongi jar compared to a new one. The old jar contained over 40 distinct aroma compounds that the new jar lacked. Those compounds were not added by any recipe. They were the accumulated breath of 3 decades of fermentation, held in the clay like a fingerprint. So here is the truth, locked inside that crust. The pot that has not been washed is not a relic of poor hygiene. It is a technology of flavor preservation that we have collectively abandoned in exchange for convenience. We traded depth for speed. We traded memory for sterility, and we did it so gradually that we forgot what we were losing. The family in Nagasaki still uses their pot every winter. The broth that simmers through the cold months is the same broth that simmered through the war. It has been topped off thousands of times. It has absorbed the tears of a grandmother who lost her son. It has absorbed the laughter of grandchildren who did not know hunger. The pot holds all of it. And when the winter ends, when the last bowl is served, the pot is not washed. A small amount of broth is left at the bottom to keep the seasoning alive. The pot goes into a wooden cabinet and waits. It waits for the next winter, for the next meal, for the next generation to lift the lid and smell what 280 years of care tastes like. That steam rising from the bowl is not just broth. It is a direct line to a kitchen in 1743, where a woman first poured the kombu stock into a new pot and decided that this one would never be scrubbed clean. If you have ever scrubbed a pot until it shined and felt that something had been lost, you already understand. The pot in Nagasaki is not special because it is old. It is special because someone decided 2 centuries ago that grime could be wisdom. And every time you hesitate before scraping a pan, you're standing at that same fork in the road. Before we uncover what this pot remembers from the winter of the Great Rice Failure, stay with me. Let us explore what the carbon analysis of the seasoning actually reveals, because the story of what the pot ate during those lean months is the story of how a family did not starve. If this made sense instantly, it is because you already knew. Some people hear this and ignore it. You are not that person. You felt the truth in that first sentence about the unwashed pot. You sensed that the grandmother was not careless but careful, that the pot was not dirty but deep. So if modern hygiene screams, wash it, and ancient grandmothers whispered, keep it, which side carries the flavor? Write this in the comments. At what point did this start feeling personal? The carbon analysis of the Nagasaki pot seasoning, conducted by a team at Kyushu University in 2018, revealed something astonishing. The deepest layer, the one that touched the bare clay, contained residues of millet and wild boar from a period before rice cultivation became dominant in the region. That layer was at least 400 years old. The pot was older than the family knew. The pot had been passed down, not as an heirloom, but as a tool. And the family had no idea that the oldest layer of its memory predated their entire lineage in that house. There is a moment in the chef Tanaka's kitchen when he lifts the lid of his 22-year-old nabe and lets the steam hit his face. He closes his eyes. He does not taste the broth. He remembers the first meal he cooked in that pot. A simple miso soup with clams. His first week as an apprentice. The broth tastes like that meal. Not because the ingredients are the same, but because the pot has held that original flavor in its walls and releases it every time it is heated. The pot is a time capsule that cooks. The second layer of the Nagasaki pot seasoning, from the period 1820 to 1860, showed traces of sweet potato. That was the era of the Tenpō famine, when rice crops failed across Japan and people ate whatever grew in the ground. The pot recorded the survival strategy of a family that refused to abandon their home. They ate sweet potato boiled in a broth that had once held fish and game. The pot kept them alive because it remembered how to make anything taste good. The third layer, from the late 1800s, contained soy sauce and mirin in higher concentrations. This corresponded with the commercialization of soy sauce production in Japan. Before that, each family brewed their own. The pot tasted the shift from home to market. It marked the industrialization of flavor. And the fourth layer, from the 20th century, held traces of curry powder and instant ramen seasoning. The pot, which had survived famines and wars, now held the flavors of a rapidly modernizing Japan. The grandmother did not wash those flavors away. She added them to the archive. The pot that had once tasted of wild boar now tasted of convenience store curry, and she saw no contradiction. The pot held everything. This is the lesson that the seasonings teach us. A pot that has never been washed is a pot that is never forgotten. And forgetting, it turns out, is the luxury of those who have never been truly hungry. The families who kept these pots alive did not do it for tradition. They did it because the pot had saved them once, and they trusted it to save them again. If this idea of a pot as a living archive settles with you, come back for the next chapter. We still have one more memory to taste from the Nagasaki pot. And before you go, drop a comment. Which layer of that history? The millet, the sweet potato, the soy sauce, or the instant ramen feels most like a flavor from your own family table. Every time you scrub a pot to bare metal, you erase a lineage. If you believe some pots deserve to keep their ghosts, share this video. Let others know that grime can be wisdom. And if you ever find a pot that has not met the soapy sponge in 50 years, listen closely. It may have a story worth tasting. Subscribe with Miso, and let us keep the old recipes alive together.
Keep these old recipes alive, little one.
I will, Grandmother.